Sunday, July 11th, 1943. Dear Kitty, to return to the upbringing theme for the umpteenth time, I must tell you that I really am trying to be helpful, friendly, and good, and to do everything I can see that the rain of rebukes dies down to a light summer drizzle. It is mighty difficult to be on such model behavior with people you can't bear, especially when you don't mean a word of it. But I do really see that I get on better by shamming a bit, instead of my old habit of telling everyone exactly what I think, although no one ever asked my opinion or attached the slightest importance to it. I often lose my cue and simply can't swallow my rage at some injustice, so that for 4 long weeks we hear nothing but everlasting chatter about the cheekiest and most shameless girl on earth. Don't you think that sometimes I've cause for complaint? It's a good thing I'm not a grouser, because then I might get sour and bad-tempered. I have decided to let my shorthand go a bit, firstly to give me more time for my other subjects and secondly because of my eyes. I'm so miserable and wretched as I've become very short-sighted and ought to have had glasses for a long time already. Phew, what an all I shall look, but you know, of course, in hiding one cannot. Yesterday everyone talked of nothing but Anne's eyes, because Mummy had suggested sending me to the oculist with Mrs. Cuffuis. I shook in my shoes somewhat at this announcement, for it is no small thing to do. Go out of doors, imagine if, in the street doesn't bear thinking about. I was petrified at first, then glad. But it doesn't go as easily as that, because all the people who would have to approve such a step could not reach an agreement quickly. All the difficulties and risks had first to be carefully weighed, although Miep would have gone with me straight away. In the meantime, I got out my gray coat from the cupboard, but it was so small that it looked as if it belonged to my younger sister. I am really curious to know what will come of it all, but I don't think the plan will come off because the British have landed in Sicily now and Daddy is once again hoping for a quick finish. Ellie gives Margot and me a lot of office work. It makes us both feel quite important and is a great help to her. Anyone can file away correspondence and write in the sales book, but we take special pains. Miep is just like a pack mule, she fetches and carries so much. Almost every day she manages to get hold of some vegetables for us and brings everything in shopping bags on her bicycle. We always long for Saturdays when our books come. Just like little children receiving a present. Ordinary people simply don't know what books mean to us. Shut up here. Reading, learning, and the radio are our amusements. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, July 13th, 1943. Dear Kitty, yesterday afternoon, with Daddy's permission, I asked Dussel whether he would please be so good, being really very polite, as to allow me to use the little table in our room twice a week in the afternoons, from 4 o'clock till 5:30. I sit there every day from 2:30 till 2, while Russell sleeps, but otherwise the room plus table are out of bounds. Inside, in our common room, there is much too much going on. It is impossible to work there, and besides, Daddy likes to sit at the writing table and work too sometimes. So, it was quite a reasonable request, and the question was put very politely. Now honestly, what do you think the very learned Dussel replied? No. Just plain no. I was indignant and refused to be put off like that, so I asked him the reason for his no. But I was sent away with a flea in my ear. This was the barrage which followed. I have to work too, and if I can't work in the afternoons, then there is no time left for me at all. I must finish my task, otherwise I've started it all for nothing. Anyway, you don't work seriously at anything. Your mythology. Now just what kind of work is that? Knitting and reading are not work either. I am at the table and shall stay there. My reply was, Mr. Dussel, I do work seriously, and there is nowhere else for me to work in the afternoons. I beg of you to kindly reconsider my request. With these words the offended and turned her back on the very learned doctor, ignoring him completely. I was seething with rage, and thought Dussel frightfully rude, which he certainly was, and myself very friendly. In the evening when I could get hold of Pym, I told him how it had gone off and discussed what I should do next, because I was not going to give in and preferred to clear it up myself. Pym told me how I ought to tackle the problem, but warned me that it would be better to leave it till the next day, as I was so het up. I let this advice go to the winds and waited for Dussel after the domes were done. Pym sat in the room next to us, which had a calming influence on me. I began, Mr. Dussel, I don't suppose you see any point in discussing the anymore, but I must ask you to do so. Dussel then remarked with his sweetest smile, I am always, and at all times, prepared to discuss this matter, but it has already been settled. I went on talking, though continually interrupted by Dussel. When you first came here, we arranged that this room should be for both of us, if we were to divide it fairly. You would have the morning and I all the afternoon. But I don't even ask that much, and I think that my 2 afternoons, 8 really perfectly reasonable. At this Dussel jumped up as if someone had stuck a needle into him. You can't talk about your rights here at all. And where am I to go then? I shall ask Mr. Van Don whether he will build a little compartment in the attic. Then I can go and sit there. I simply can't work anywhere. With you one always gets trouble. If your sister Margot, who after all has more reason to ask such a thing, would have come to me with the same questions, I should not think of refusing, but you. Then followed the business about the mythology and the knitting, and was insulted again. However, she did not show it and let Dussel finish speaking, but you, one simply can't talk to you. You are so outrageously selfish as long as you can get what you want. You don't mind pushing everyone else to one side. I've never seen such a child. But after all, I suppose I shall be obliged to give you your own way, because otherwise I shall be told later on that, and Frank failed her exam, because Mr. Dussel mild riot give up the table for her. It went on, and finally it was such a torrent I could hardly keep pace with it. At one moment I thought, in a minute I'll give him such a smack in the face that he'll fly up to the ceiling together with his lies, but the next moment I said to myself, keep calm. Such a fellow isn't worth getting up about. After giving final vent to his fury, Master Dussel left the room with an expression of mixed wrath and triumph, his coat stuffed with food. I dashed to Daddy and told him all that he had not already heard of the story. Pim decided to talk to Dussel the same evening, which he did. They talked for over half an hour. The theme of the conversation was something like this. First of all, they talked about whether and should sit at the table, yes or no. Daddy said that he and Dussel had already discussed the subject once before, when he had professed to agree with Dussel, in order not to put him in the wrong in front of the young. Daddy had not thought it fair then. Dussel thought that I should not speak as if he was an intruder who tried to monopolize everything, but Daddy stuck up for me firmly over that, because he had heard for himself that I had not breathed a word of such a thing. To and fro it went, Daddy defending my selfishness and my trifling work, Dussel grumbling continually. Finally, Dussel had to give in after all, and I had the opportunity of working undisturbed until 5 o'clock for 2 afternoons a week. Dussel looked down his nose very much, didn't speak to me for 2 days, and still had to go and sit at the table from 5 till 5:30, frightfully childish. A person of 54 who is still so pedantic and small-minded must be so by nature, and will never improve. Yours, Anne. Friday, July 16, 1943. Dear Kitty. Burglars again, but real this time. This morning Peter went to the warehouse at 7 o'clock as usual, and at once noticed that both the warehouse door and the door opening onto the street were ajar. He told Pim, who tuned the radio in the private office to Germany, and locked the door. Then they went upstairs together. The standing orders for such times were observed as usual, no taps to be turned on, therefore, no washing, silence, everything to be finished by 8 o'clock, and no lavatory. We were all very glad that we had slept so well and not heard anything. Not until 11:30 did we learn from Mr. Cufuus that the burglars had pushed in the outer door with a crowbar and had forced the warehouse door. However, they did not find much to steal, so they tried their luck upstairs. They stole 2 cash boxes containing 40 florins, postal orders and checkbooks, and then worst of all the coupons for 150 kilos of sugar. Mr. Cufuus thinks that they belong to the same gang as the ones who tried all 3 doors 6 weeks ago. They were unsuccessful then. It has caused rather a stir in the building, but the secret annex can't seem to go on without sensations like this. We were very glad that the typewriters and money in our wardrobe, where they are brought upstairs every evening, were safe. Yours, Anne. Monday, July 19, 1943. Dear Kitty. North Amsterdam was very heavily bombed on Sunday. The destruction seems to be terrible. Whole streets lie in ruins, and it will take a long time before all the people are dug out. Up till now there are 200 dead and countless wounded. The hospitals are crammed. You hear of children lost in the smoldering ruins, looking for their parents. I shudder when I recall the dull droning rumble in the distance, which for us marked the approaching destruction. Yours, Anne. Friday, July 23rd, 1943. Dear Kitty, just for fun, I'm going to tell you each person's first wish when we are allowed to go outside again. Margot and Mr. Van Don long more than anything for a hot bath filled to overflowing and want to stay in it for half an hour. Mrs. Van Don wants most to go and eat cream cakes immediately. Dussel thinks of nothing but seeing Lotch, his wife, mummy of her cup of coffee. Daddy is going to visit Mr. Vossen first, Peter the town and a cinema. While I should find it so blissful, I shouldn't know where to start. But most of all, I long for a home of our own, to be able to move freely and to have some help with my work again at last, in other words school. Ellie has offered to get us some fruit. It costs next to nothing. Grapes F.5.00 per kilo, gooseberries F.0.70 per pound, 1 peach F.0.50, 1 kilo melon FL50. Then you see in the newspapers every evening in bold letters, play fair and keep prices down. Yours, Anne. Monday, July 26, 1943. Dear Kitty, nothing but tumult and uproar yesterday. We are still very head up about it all. You might really ask, does a day go by without some excitement? We had the first warning siren while we were at breakfast, but we don't give a hoot about that. It only means that the planes are crossing the coast. After breakfast I went and lay down for an hour as I had a bad headache. Then I went downstairs. It was about 2 o'clock. Margot had finished her office work at 2:30. She had not packed her things together when the sirens began to wail, so upstairs I went again with her. It was high time, for we had not been upstairs 5 minutes when they began shooting hard, so much so that we went and stood in the passage. And yes, the house rumbled and shook, and down came the bombs. One clasped my escape bag close to me more because wanted to have something to hold then with an idea of escaping, because there's nowhere we can go. If ever we come to the extremity of fleeing from here, the street would be just as dangerous as an air raid. This one subsided after half an hour, but the activity in the house increased. Peter came down from his lookout post in the attic. Dussel was in the main office. Mrs. Van Don felt safe in the private office. Mr. Van Don had been watching from the loft, and we on the little landing dispersed ourselves too. I went upstairs to see rising above the harbor the columns of smoke Mr. Van Don had told us about. Before long you could smell burning, and outside it looked as if a thick mist hung everywhere. Although such a big fire is not a pleasant sight, luckily for us it was all over, and we went about our respective tasks. That evening at dinner, another air raid alarm. It was a nice meal, but my hunger vanished, simply at the sound of the alarm. Nothing happened, and 3/4 of an hour later it was all clear. The dishes were stacked ready to be done. Air raid warning, ack fire, an awful lot of planes. Oh, dear me, twice in one day. That's too much, we all thought, but that didn't help at all. Once again the bombs rained down, the other side this time, on Schiphol, Amsterdam airport, according to the British. The planes dived and climbed. We heard the hum of their engines, and it was very gruesome. Each moment I thought, one's falling now. Here it comes. I can assure you that when I went to bed at 9 o'clock, I couldn't hold my legs still. I woke up at the stroke of 12. Planes. Dussel was undressing. I didn't let that put me off, and at the first shot, I leaped out of bed, wide awake. 2 hours with Daddy, and still they kept coining. Then they ceased firing, and I was able to go to bed. I fell asleep at 2:30. 7 o'clock. I sat up in bed with a start. Mr. Van Don was with Daddy. Burglars was my first thought. I heard Mr. Van Don say, everything. I thought that everything had been stolen. But no, this time it was wonderful news, such as we have not heard for months, perhaps in all the war years. Mussolini has resigned. The King of Italy has taken over the government. We jumped for joy. After the terrible day yesterday, at last something good again and hope. Hope for it to end. Hope for peace. Crawler called in and told us that Fokkers has been badly damaged. Meanwhile, we had another air raid alarm with planes overhead and one more warning siren. I'm just about choked with alarms, very tired, and don't feel a bit like work. But now the suspense over Italy will awaken the hope that it will soon end, perhaps even this year. Yours, Anne. Thursday, July 29th, 1943. Dear Kitty, Mrs. Van Dawn, Dussel, and I were doing the dishes and I was extraordinarily quiet, which hardly ever happens, so they would have been sure to notice. In order to avoid questions, I quickly sought a fairly neutral topic and thought that the book Henry from the Other Side would meet the need. But I had made a mistake. If Mrs. Van Dawn doesn't pounce on me, then Mr. Dussel does. This was what it came to. Mr. Dussel had specially recommended us this book as being excellent, Margot, and I thought it was anything but excellent. The boy's character was certainly well drawn, but the rest I had better gloss over that. I said something to that effect while we were washing the dishes, but that brought me a packet of trouble. How can you understand the psychology of a man? Of a child is not so difficult. You are much too young for a book like that. Why, even a man of 20 would not be able to grasp it. Why did he so especially recommend this book to Margot and me? Now Dussel and Mrs. Van Dawn continued together. You know much too much about things that are unsuitable for you. You've been brought up all wrong. Later on, when you are older, you won't enjoy anything. Then you'll say, I read that in books 20 years ago. You had better make haste if you want to get a husband or fall in love, or everything is sure to be a disappointment to you. You are already proficient in the theory. It's only the practice that you still lack. I suppose it's their idea of a good upbringing to always try to set me against my parents, because that is what they often do. And to tell a girl of my age nothing about grown-up subjects is an equally fine method. I see the results of that kind of upbringing frequently and all too clearly. I could have slapped both their faces at that moment as they stood there making a fool of me. I was beside myself with rage, and I'm just counting the days until I'm rid of those people. Mrs. Van Dawn is a nice one. She sets a fine example. She certainly sets a bad one. She is well known as being very pushing, selfish, cunning, calculating, and is never content. I can also add vanity and coquetry to the list. There is no question about it, she is an unspeakably disagreeable person. I could write whole chapters about Madame, and who knows, perhaps I will someday. Anyone can put on a fine coat of varnish outside. Mrs. Van Dawn is friendly to strangers and especially men, so it is easy to make a mistake when you have only known her for a short time. Mummy thinks she is too stupid to waste words over, Margot too unimportant, Pym too ugly, literally and figuratively, and I, after long observation, for I was never prejudiced from the start, have come to the conclusion that she is all there and a lot more. She has so many bad qualities. Why should I even begin about one of them? Yours, Anne. P.S. Will the reader take into consideration that when this story was written the writer had not cooled down from her fury?